Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to part 2 of my Melodic Techno for Ableton template explanation. Basically, these templates I've been creating live during my live stream session. You can go on my channel on the live tab and you can find the 4 live stream where I create the track from scratch. So if you want a more in-depth view of the process. Today we're gonna talk about the arrangement, mixing and mastering of the track. Last week we covered the sound design and the MIDI composition. So I put in the description if you haven't watched it yet. And yeah, let's have a listen to the track. So we'll start with break.
We are taking the control. Your existence is over. We are the future. You cannot stop us.
So first, let's talk about the global idea. What was the idea for the arrangement, the track? So usually during the live stream, I don't really have any precise idea, and I just start with the drum and the bass. And when I have that, I try to find element. Here I knew more or less that I wanted like a rolling bass line, something with some FM stab, a little bit in the style of Anima. And yeah, that's how I started the track, kick, bass line, the stab. And then I needed to find some synth to kind of answer the stab. That's where I create the chord. Then I did it like kind of a harp or a key like that lead the track. That's where I create this key element. And then I knew at some point I will add some vocal. And then I wanted to start to build the track. So in terms of arrangement, I'm gonna talk quickly globally, and then we're gonna go after to see each part of the track. Globally, you have so your intro, you have the break, right, and then you have the chorus one with the first big drop. Then it's lead into the break 2, which is a longer break where we will have drop 2 and the second chorus, and then you will have a verse just before the final break and the outro. So here I've done a bit different than usual. Sometimes I will put the verse more like before the second break. Here I put it on the end. You can see it's not too long, it's 5 minutes as well. So yeah, this main idea was to have obviously the stab playing during the drop only, not during the break. This way, when you build the tension and you release the tension when you drop, you have this new element which is very nice and very percussive. So that was the idea effect. And then like I said, I wanted to have some element to answer this stab. So I had the chord here and I have the lead as well. So yeah, let's start from the beginning. It starts just with the kick and the bass and the pad. You can see here there is a locket on the kick. You have both bass playing. You have this pad as well that I like to put at the beginning because it sets the mood and it's avoid to be too empty. And then after 8 bar, I will add the low end and remove the locket. So I have this main lead element which is playing just right before. That's helped to announce that something new is coming. It tells the listener that, hey, something is coming, get ready. So now we have the same pattern, the same element, but just now with the bass. And then we're gonna introduce the hats, some synth element. So here to introduce new element, same trick, a locket, and then right before playing the same note, and then you have as well this SFX here, which is gonna help the transition. And then I introduce the hats and this main synth as well, which is coming. It got a low pass filter, so it's gonna be introduced slowly and slowly. Here I don't use the low pass filter to modulate, I use the envelope modulation of the filter, which does basically the same effect. It's bringing more and more higher and harmonics. So here I just have the closed hat, then I will bring the open hat. Again, then I'm gonna introduce the snare, another open hat. I have this element coming. I have my FX start to play.
We are taking the control.
So here for the for the break, you can see I don't straight away remove the kick drum. I usually use a low cut first. That's to kind of help the transition to make it smoother. I will first low cut, and then you can see after I remove the drum here is to gradually get rid of the element. I always use SFX as well. That's usually help the transition. The noise here, you can see I have automation on some white noise. It's pretty subtle and easy, but it's...
We are taking the control.
It just works well. Alright, so now in the break, a couple of things happening. First, you will have two kind of rising elements who's gonna help build the tension. You have this riser send, which is pitching up and up and up and up. And then you have this snare roll, which is gonna get louder and louder because I've played with the velocity. Another thing to keep in mind that's gonna be tension, I have on my submix down, I'm sending basically my whole track into a return. So this is kind of a washout effect. So it's like a long reverb. So the reason why I'm doing this is, for example, I will send my whole track into this washout effect. So it kind of creates this noise, a little bit like I was creating with here. It creates some kind of noise, but it's like noise into a reverb and with a long tail, so it's just help the transition. Unfortunately, I cannot really solo it. Yeah, that was help the transition. So this is gonna go up and get louder and louder. So it's gonna get more and more noise the more we goes into the break. And I have as well this riser knob. It's a rack I've created. Basically, the more I crank it up, the more it's gonna add some delay and reverb. So I can accentuate it here. It's kind of, if you're a DJ, you kind of have this kind of DJ effect as well. It's pretty common to do that. All of that's gonna happen to build the tension, and in the meantime I'm gonna add some new element. So the lead is gonna play a new pattern to what you was hearing there. It goes its own answer. Okay, then you're gonna have this vocal who's gonna start to appear as well.
We are taking the control.
So that's what is coming new. And keep in mind that you have your chord where it's gonna get, which was like playing but with a low pass filter, so it was kind of muffled. And we're gonna open more and more this filter to kind of hear it more and more and bring the tension. And yeah, the fact to open the filter like this is always help to build the tension. And yeah, so it goes like this.
We are taking the control.
Everything starts to go up.
Your existence is over.
Here we get rid of the drum and the bass.
We are the future.
And then we have a blank before the drop. So here one thing's important to note is like this not playing just right before we cut everything. Again, the same purpose than before, it's helped to tell the listener, oh, something is happening. So when you remove everything, it doesn't sound weird or brutal. If you don't have this, it's kind of sounding weird, you transition.
We are the future.
It works, but it works better with this note. And then here the idea is to obviously build the tension, everything's go up. And then when you're very high, instead of having you drop and putting back your kick and everything, when you're in a high peak, it's great to have like 1-2 bar, sometimes more, like where you cut everything just to bring down the dynamic. This way you bring everything back down to then when you have your drop and your chorus, bring everything back up. So this creates a nice dynamic movement which works well. So build the tensions, go up, stop everything to bring the dynamic down, and then you still have this tension obviously, but then you can go from down to super loud and up with when you kick and you drop. And usually, so you do this cut, and then right before to a drop, you usually have a send or a vocal. Here I made a combination of both, and then after you go into the drop where you have this horn effect, and you will have as well the stop playing. So here one thing important with the arrangement, the fact that I didn't have the stop playing before, it's kind of surprised the listener because this is something he never heard before, because I could have put my stop as well in the break to already introduce it, but here was great to don't do that. I already have so many elements already, but yeah, so it goes like this.
We are the future. You cannot stop us.
And then yeah, when we drop just the kick, the bass, obviously we have the horn, like I said, we had a bit of SFX, our main stab, nothing else is playing. And then we're gonna start to add some drums to get things a bit more driving. We're gonna add some leads as well, is coming up. To answer the stab, basically it's like call and answer. And here you see I've just make it play like for 16 bar, not even 16 bar, but it just answers 2 times, and then I have the other send answering. This is nice, it adds variation. It allowed me as well to go into the second main break. Here, the idea for the second break, it's pretty much the same than for the first one. You're gonna have your snare roll, your riser, same SFX in the mix down and the same mix down with the washout effect. It's pretty much the same. It's just the structure change a little bit. Obviously, if you want something different. One thing that is different is here on this drop, you see the key one, this little key was not playing. Here we're gonna make it play when it drop. It make a less impactful drop, if I'm being honest. Like this one is very much more impactful, but it make it more melodic. So, and it add variation. So that's why I decided to put like this. So here what we're gonna do, again, we're gonna do this part here. It's pretty much the same than, not the same, but it's similar. You have still your kick and your drum, then you get rid of, and then you will have a big blank before the drop again. So here you can see it's like 8 bar before. And here we're gonna bring everything down, and we're gonna have this send as well. You can see here you have a filter modulation. We'll bring everything down to then open everything again and then drop. So it sounds like this. Again, some SFX here. You can see here what I've done with the lead. I've done the opposite than before. Before it was right before to cut an element. This was playing. Here's the opposite. The element cut and this is straight away playing. It's just another way to do things.
Your existence is over. We are taking control. We are the future. You cannot stop us.
Still pretty effective. And here's the same idea, to have this blank here, this big blank. And then you have the same 2 not playing. You have as well some SFX that help with the drop effect. But again, bringing up the tension, calming everything down, and then bringing back everything super loud and high. And again, dynamics, it's super important, having some part loud, some part quieter, to then after being able to go loud. Because if you are loud and you go again loud, then it's not as much impactful as if you have something low that go then high. So then it goes into the drop 2, which is also the chorus 2, which is pretty similar than before, except that this one you have the key playing. Then the chord. Then we're gonna add the snare. Alright, and here's the verse. I wanted to do something different without the stab. So that's why I like the way it's built, because this basically what I've realized is that this chord If I was just playing it by itself,
We are taking the control.
like without drum, it works really well. I found out when I was experimenting with the arrangement that when you have the chord playing with all of the drum and everything, and you do a short break and then you drop everything without the drum, it just work well, and then without the stab. So that's what I've done here, this. And then I decided to put the vocal to answer the chord. So it's like chord, vocal, chord, vocal, chord, vocal. And then we will have, again, back the drum, and the lead's gonna play again before to go into the final break.
We are the future. You cannot stop us. We are taking the control. We are taking the control. We are taking the control.
Then we goes into the final break. Here it's pretty much the same low cut, and then we have this 3-note playing just right before the drop with the horn, and we get rid of everything slowly, bring all the filter down, and yeah, then we go to the outro. Just a look at and the hat playing. And yeah, that's our global arrangement. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about automation and variation, what I've done on this track. So it can go from simple little variation, like for example with the hat, after 4th bar I have this double just a little variation here, for example, which gonna help with the hat. This kind of things, especially with the hat, try to don't overdo it, because I found that the more you do, the more it sounds weird and like not natural sometimes. Here in terms of automation, obviously the snare roll, the velocity to get something. You could have just like a volume automation. I like to do with the velocity because you just like draw it. The step, there is no modulation in terms of filter, but like I showed last week, here what's happening is I have the LFO, which is modulating the position of both of my wavetable, which kind of change the tone. So you're gonna hear how it's changing every 8 bar. Basically, you see it's gonna be at 0%, and then after it's gonna be at 1%, and it's result in, see, here it goes at 0%, and then 8 bar later when it's playing again, it's gonna go up. And it's the same stuff, slightly changing the tone, add variation, don't make always the same stab all the time, the same tone. That's work well. For the chord, I have obviously some modulation on the filter. I have an EQ8 here. Yeah, this is really for the arrangement, like to introduce the sound, because if you introduce straight away, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's great to have a low pass filter to slowly introduce a new element, or even to get rid of it, like for example in the outro. If you want to get rid of it and to don't remove it like brutally, you can use a low pass filter to slowly tame the high frequency, and basically you start to don't hear anymore your sound. Key here are modulate too. So this one, which is the frequency mod amount, which is basically the filter, because it's just like how much you want your envelope to modulate your filter. And obviously the more I modulate the filter, the more it's gonna open, because it's in modulation positively. So that's what I've used here to modulate. And here I play as well with the GK. Here I could have probably play a little with the GK, adds a bit of variation. I haven't done it mainly because I didn't feel like to, but I could have done it, to be honest. Here adding a bit of variation, and here as well, just to make it like sometimes a bit more in the high harmonic, sometimes low pass it, sometimes more in the high harmonic. The vocal is just the delay. So this is a trick I think I explained last week. I'm gonna explain it again. Here what's happening is I have a delay that is deactivated, and it's only activated, you see, after. The reason why, what's interesting to do is, for example, to just catch the last word of your sentence. So for example here,
we are taking the control.
It's just saying control, because if I put it like this, now
we are taking the control,
it gets a bit more messier. And then I have some automation here on the noise to bring the volume, so obviously to fade in, fade out the noise, and on the filter as well, to creating this like sweeping, whooshing kind of effect. And then here I have some send. So basically this mix down, all my tracks are going to this mix down. And what I'm doing is I'm basically sending my whole track to a return to kind of create a washout effect. On my return here, I have this rack from Make Your Transition. I put it in the description, which is just basically a reverb, but with a long decay, 100%. And you just create this kind of messy, noisy reverb out of your whole track. But that's pretty much great because the thing is, the more you send your track into this return, the louder this noisy gets, and it helps bring the tension. And the great thing is, even if I cut here, so here I'm stop sending, you will still have the tail of the reverb playing, so it's kind of creating an effect similar to this. And then I show a little bit last week as well. I have automation. Here I have a low cut, so that's helped for the transition, obviously, for the break, and this riser, which is like a washout effect as well that I'm using it. So the reason why I use this return washout and this washout on my master, this one, as far as I bring up, is the effect, but as far as I bring it down, the effect cuts suddenly. So that means, like, even if you have a reverb, you don't have the tail of the reverb is shut down straight away. Rather than here, even if I shut down the send, you will still have the tail of the reverb playing and you can still hear it. So that's why I have two different, but this one really helped to build the tension more. I found, like, really to bring things up and up with the delay and the reverb and the high pass filter. And this one is more to help the transition as well as building the tension, but it built in a different way. All right, let's talk about the mixing. So if you're familiar with my video, you know what I'm gonna say. For me, 80% of the mix is done with your sound design, your sound selection, making sure you pick up elements that fit well together, drums that fit well together. Once you've done that, usually you shouldn't have much done to do on the mix. I will mainly use EQ, reverb, and saturation. I rarely use compression except for sidechain, and even I'm using no anymore a compressor now. I use another method. Let's go over each track and we'll talk about it. So the kick is nothing, not even EQ. The kick was working. I just add this kick punch rack. I put it in the description. It's just to add a bit of transient and a bit of reverb on your kick, just to help make it a bit less dry. And then on the hats, so I've EQ'd my hats. This was mainly to cut the low, and then after, you can see here I was a bit more surgical, let's say. Here I found the hats a bit too aggressive. I like the tone, but it was a bit too aggressive. So you can see I put a little bit of attack on the sample and I kind of tamed the high frequency. So for example, that's what I was saying as well, that things can be done on sound design. For example, here you have at the opposite something with too much transient. You can use the attack to reduce the transient instead of trying to do it with a compressor, for example, or with EQ like I did. And then the last one again is again, a bit too aggressive to my taste for this track, so I kind of tame a little bit and the low cut. And then the reverb is just to put, obviously, your hats into a space. Drum bass, I'm gonna explain again how I use it. I explained it last week, but basically I like to use this at the end of the chain as the overall process. It's great because you can compress kind of everything, usually put everything more in the front. You can control the input volume with the trim here, so it will obviously affect as well how your compressor is working. The more you bring up, the more it's gonna compress. And then I will use crunch usually to add some mid-high frequency. Here I haven't used it, but that's what happens sometimes. I can, if it's bring too much very high harsh frequency, I will dump it with this parameter. And then I will use transient negatively. I like to use it like this, especially after a reverb, because it will act as a gate reverb. For example, it will shut down the tail of the reverb very fast, so you don't have a too long messy reverb tail. It helps shut it down. I like to use drum bass on the hats because it makes them sharper a bit more in the front. Snare, just reverb, drum bass, same. Nothing crazy to say. Here's the same. And then the EQ, it's case by case. Here you see I have two bass. One is more in the low, so I will low pass filter it. This one is more in the mid-high, so I boost a lot here. And I cut here, so because I don't really need this low, because there is this other bass already doing the low, and I really wanted to boost this high to make it a little bit more sharp. Here again, with frequency, you have to listen with the other bass and the kick to see until where you can cut to kind of clean and without sounding weird, obviously. And then again, delay, reverb, drum bass, EQ. So here as well, here the EQ on solo sounds weird. So here the way I EQ, because I had a lot of elements, the idea was to trying to make space a little bit for everyone, trying to boost the frequency. I feel like make it a little bit clearer and easier to hear in the mix. So I don't have rules because every synth is different. It depends obviously which octave you play or which type of synth. But first that's how I process. First I will always get rid of the low if I don't need. Then I will always try to boost one frequency range that really enhances the sound, making it clearer. More intelligible. And then I will try to cut one part of the frequency range that I don't really need or doesn't really make the sound better. So this doesn't really work all the times. Most of the time doesn't work, but when it works, I do it because then, it's leaving space for... So yeah, that's what I've done here. And then bass mono sidechain. This is the same track but in stereo. Chord is mainly sound effect for the sound design. I talked about it last week. Low pass filter, Hass effect, reverb. This is a stereo delay with Hass effect. So this again is more sound design. I talked about it last week. I mean, it's a bit mixing as well. Basically, this sound was originally in the middle, and like I said, the track is quite rich. You have the stab, the bass, you have the key, you have the lead, the vocal, everything is pretty much in the middle. So I say, okay, I need to put this chord on the stereo side, and that's why I use this delay as a Hass effect. The principle of Hass effect is just to use a delay in stereo, and you slightly delay the left from the right. So here you can see the right is slightly delayed from 40 milliseconds. You don't want any feedback. You want the dry rate at 100%. And doing that is going to trick your ears, making it believe that the sound is stereo when it's just like one slightly delay compared to the other. So that's a mid-side EQ. Here again, to be honest, I don't really have chips here. What I usually do is for the side, I will always again look for this frequency that enhances the sound and try to remove the frequency I don't need. And for the mid, obviously it depends the sound, but I will usually boost for the middle, and I will always boost as well sometimes the very high frequency, like above 8 kilohertz or so. To be fair, usually I'm not going down crazy on EQing because I have a lot of element on this track. I had to because it was a bit too messy to my ears. But yeah, cutting the low and boosting the high. Same with the vocal. This was mainly to make it more intelligible again as well.
Your existence is over.
You need to boost a lot the high.
We are taking the control.
And one thing actually I often forget to say on my video when I explain the mixing, but one of the main important things is basically getting your volume right. So I usually put the kick at -6 and then after I will adjust. So you can adjust the volume like with the fader. Usually here you can have access of the volume straight away here when you are with your track. Sometimes I will have the utility, so I will just adjust with the gain here. This is really depends. But getting your level right, probably most important than trying to EQ compress. We always say we always put a lot of emphasis in EQ compressing, but the volume balance is super important. The thing is, why we cannot really put emphasis in the volume balance is that there is no tips that can be given. It's just like you have to trust your ears, and for that you have to have experience and develop your ears. You cannot really give tips to balance because it's obviously each track is very different, and some track you will want to put some element more in the front than others. So yeah, or even inside the same track, some parts a bit more in the front than others. So yeah. All right, so let's talk about the mastering. So this is what I would call like a homemade mastering. I call it homemade because I don't consider myself like a good mastering engineer, but I knew a few things just to help you make a track kind of compete, or let's say to be able to reference with professional master track, or even if you just want to see how your track compare to other, or if you want to try your track into a club and yeah, you want to be at more or less the same level as other track, this is a good chain to get started. So I will first use utility based on in mono and the stereo width. That's always my first things. Then I will use the glue compressor obviously to glue everything. Here the trick is to most of the time activate this EQ, this locket. The reason being, usually in your track the louder pass is gonna be the low end, and so basically that's what's gonna trigger your compressor. So you kick every time it's kicking, it's gonna trigger the sidechain. You don't want that. You want a more global compression. So in order to don't have the kick to like get this punchy, you're gonna watch the you can see it's the kick. Rather than when I activate the EQ, you have the kick obviously, but you have as well sometimes the send. So it's more global things. So that's why you want to activate that. Yeah, then after the setting, I will usually always put the attack 30 seconds. The releases depend. This is a track by track. Then I will always put the ratio as 4. And then yeah, the release, the threshold, and the makeup, that's what really I'm gonna play with. It depends how much you want to compress your sound. Honestly, there is no really rule, but yeah, I rarely go for something too crazy. Like I stay under 5 dB of reduction, and then I compensate with the makeup. I often activate the soft clipping as well, and yeah. This obviously is gonna make everything louder. Then I usually use an EQ to kind of rebalance everything. So I will always have a low cut. Getting up everything under 30 Hz. Usually in the range between 200-400 Hz you have something usually which is not really nice. So this depends, but usually I cut a little bit. Always anyway with the EQ in mastering, just like small changes. Yeah, 500 as well. I usually like to boost at 3 kilo and 5 kilo. That's frequency usually that when you boost them, it's make you sound a little bit clearer and more intelligible. So that's what I usually do that. Here I use high shelf, so it's kind of boosting all the high frequency. Again, it makes you sound a bit more airy and brighter. It's subtle, but it helps rebalancing everything. Let me just actually take a part which is a bit more. Then we have saturator. So this is just gonna add some harmonics. That's the only point. Just to make the mix louder, to gain in loudness. Same with digital, so you can see, just makes things louder. Same with color limiter, it doesn't really act as a limiter, you can see it's not gonna reduce anything. But I like to use the color limiter because you have this color knob and the saturation, which gonna add a bit of warmth to your sound. It works well on the low end as well. And then another limiter. Just to kind of squash. Again, I could have been maybe a bit louder on that, but yeah, that's what I decided to choose. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the mastering. So yeah, I cover pretty much everything. I hope you like this video. If you wanna support me, you can grab the template, the link in the description. And thank you very much for watching, guys. See you next time. Bye bye.